Today, I want to talk about how to build a personal value system that actually holds up under pressure because that's when it matters most. Most personal values frameworks really do not fail at the level of belief. If you ask somebody, what do you believe? What do you value? Very often they can rattle off a list of things, a list of features or ideals or things that they care about, things that might sound good on a bumper sticker, but they fail at the level of behavior. The question is, do you live these things out consistently? Do you have a program for living these things out consistently? Because values matter most when they are challenged by circumstance or when they are subconsciously subverted, causing us to behave incoherently or hypocritically. And so, when a value and a personal value that we have cannot guide decisions under conflict, when it cannot clarify what must be preserved at the cost of something else, then it's not functioning as a system. Then its its worth as a value is negated or neutralized. So, a value that you hold may express a commitment that you have, but if it's not regulating your conduct rather, it's not functioning as a personal value. A working values system does not exist to describe your identity or your preferences. It exists to manage constraints in your life. A personal values system is meant to reduce the ambiguity in your decision making process. So it provides an internal hierarchy. Your personal values are meant to offer you continuity across time. Without these properties, values collapse under pressure. Why do these values collapse? When we hold to a personal value and we struggle to live that value out, right, then we have to understand why that happens. Most failures of moral clarity, in my experience, are not caused by inconsistency in belief. They are caused by the absence of a structure that can translate belief into durable action. A system designed to express, um, or rather, a system like a system designed to express aspiration can't really resolve any contradictions in your life. Um, and this is what I found is that most personal value systems are designed to express what I would like my life to look like rather than things that I truly value that inform the trade offs I'm willing to make when situations require me to make a decision between two good things or two bad things. And that personal value systems that I have, it may survive reflection, but it fails to govern behavior. So, in typical fashion, I want to draw from a couple historically rooted ideas about um, how to build a personal value system that actually holds up under scrutiny and holds up when challenged by the circumstances of life. Because it's one thing to have a personal value system that is challenged on a theoretical level by a conflicting ideology. I value this, you value that. I value freedom, you value constraint. I value independence, you value something else, right? And those things clash. Um, it's one thing to have a personal value system and defend it against those kinds of ideas. It's another thing to say, you know, I value independence until somebody else is acting independently, and then I want to force them to conform with me. Either my personal value hasn't been contextually nuanced enough to account for both those sets of behavior, or I'm not acting in accordance with my personal values. And the more detailed I can be in my own understanding and articulation of my personal value system, then the better I can understand whether I'm acting consistently in the trade offs I make in real life. So, I want to start off with this first idea. One of my favorite philosophers of all time, Immanuel Kant. Um, Kant's account of moral judgment in his work, the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, relies on the principle of universalizability, which is a mouthful, but essentially it means, can this be universalized, right? Like, like this question of um, is murder right or wrong? Right. And so, well, we ask the question: is murder universalizable? Meaning, if everybody murdered, would people still be able to murder? And the answer is no, because then everybody would be dead and you wouldn't be able to murder it. And so murder wouldn't exist anymore, right? So the idea of like, oh, maybe murder is a moral good. It's like, well, it cannibalizes itself as a concept. So it can't be universalized. You know what I'm saying? So same thing with lying. Well, is it good? Is it a moral good to lie? Well, can that practice be universalized? Well, if everybody lied all the time, then there'd be no such thing as truth. And if there's no such thing as truth, then there's no such thing as a lie. So so the concept of lying all the time can't be universalized, right? So this is how Kant kind of like programmatically tries to build out his concept of morality. Whereas you have to act on principles that could be adopted by all rational agents in similar circumstances. And the test here is not emotional plausibility. Does this resonate with me? Right? Although that's important. Or social utility. Does this work on a social level and a community level? The test for Kant is internal logical coherence. A person who acts on a reason that they could not accept from another is not acting from principle. And so this standard that Kant puts forward is a great starting point for how to build out a personal value system that actually holds up, because it allows you to resort to a method behind the values, which is universalizability, right? Which is, do you act like universalizability, which is one must act on principles that could be adopted by all rational agents in similar circumstances, right? So this standard is rigorous, and that's great, but it remains very formal and theoretical. So a maxim may be universally consistent without having any operational force on our behavior. It might remain intact at the level of judgment, but collapse under pressure when competing demands are present. So the system, your system is intact, but the agent itself is paralyzed when it comes to enacting those values. So let's move forward. Let's take this concept of universalizability and just bracket it for a moment. Let's move on to another philosopher, Christine Korsgaard. She reframes this failure, where in her work, The Sources of Normativity, she argues that moral obligation arises from the structure of agency itself. A person acts from reasons they endorse, reasons that hold their identity together across time. And values are not useful because they motivate, they're useful because they justify. A value that can't continue to justify behavior when other options are more comfortable or socially acceptable is not going to regulate your action. You're just going to do the more comfortable thing or the more socially acceptable thing, right? Um, a value is meant to justify something. So if you're being peer pressured into doing something and you want to resist that peer pressure, and you have a value there that says, no, 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 we're acting from different value systems. You're telling me to do this. My value system is telling me to do something else. Right. So it's mirroring context. So we've got Kant, we've got Christine Korsgaard. So Kant's concept of universalizability, Christine Korsgaard's conception of values normativity, which is that values are meant to justify, normalize, which are meant to normalize our behavior via justification rather than motivation. And then we move to Elizabeth Anscombe in her book Modern Moral Philosophy, where she points to an even earlier failure, which is that ethical language itself is detached from lived practice. That's detached from lived practice actually loses force. So a value that cannot impose friction on behavior has no ethical content at all. It might describe an attitude, but it does not guide an action. So a person does not, in fact, need better values, Anscombe would say. They need values that do something under pressure. So let's apply some of these ideas. Kant's concept of universalizability, uh, Korsgaard's conception of values as norming, as justifying, and Anscombe's concept of uh, values being things that impose friction on our behavior, right? And that values that don't impose friction on our behavior are not values. So let's take those three ideas from Kant and Korsgaard and Anscombe. Let's see what we can do with them. So, a value system, what a functional value system requires. What does a functional value system require? So, based on these concepts, a personal value system has a few features, especially one that holds up under pressure. A value system has to operate as a behavioral framework, right? It's very tempting to talk about personal values as um, like, oh, I value honesty, I value truth, right? But those are placeholders for behavior, right? What we mean is like, I commit to telling the truth. I commit to living independently. That carries more weight. It's a promise to the world and to ourselves. It has to actually constrain our choices. It has to actually absorb all the complexity that challenges it. It has to actually produce direction across different forms of friction in our lives. So our value system is not merely a list, it is actually a behavioral mechanism that we use to manage our behavior. So, so here are a few features of a functional value system. Number one, that a value system must be specific. It has to have a specification. A value must be applicable in specific types of decisions, right? So general language is insufficient. So for a value to guide action, it has to resolve concrete tension between alternatives. So for example, let's look at this in sort of a less moral situation. Let's say that you have a job and you really like your job and you get headhunted by blah blah blah, right? And you say, I'm not going to consider another job offer unless the total compensation is at least 15% higher than what I'm currently making. Otherwise, the friction and the trouble and the time of that, and the relational costs of starting over and meeting new people and starting at a new company and changing my insurance and da da da, it's literally not worth it, right? So you say, I'm not even going to show up to an interview for a position that pays less than 15% more than what I'm currently making. That's an example of a very specific kind of value constraint that you place on your behavior, right? What it does is it dictates what you do in a trade-off. So this is specification. So what we're talking about are features of features of a functional value system. Feature number one, specification, situational specification. Feature number two, hierarchy. So values must be ordered. We cannot assume that all these values exist in this harmonious constellation that will work itself out. Many times we hold two values that are equally legitimate, but one takes priority over the other in a specific situation, right? So going back to the job situation, right? I value my current job and I value the relationships there and um, uh, uh, I value adding value, right? But I have this other priority of increasing my own earning and making more money for myself, right? And there are certain points at which one of those will win over the other, right? If I don't value my current working relationships at all and I only value making money, that's in a way a simpler ethical system, but one that's not so great for the long term. If I only value my job, I'm going to stay there at the cost of increasing my own ends, right? Which is also not a great long-term strategy either. What I want is to have both of these priorities in place in my personal value system where I have a situation where these two things align and they're both giving me what I want at the same time, where my value at my job are subservient to, but serving the values I have to increase, let's say, my financial independence or my net worth, right? And there may come a tipping point where there's another opportunity to fill that space. And then my value of showing up for these people in this context, in this place, and adding value here is replaced and recycled out for something else, right? If the disparity becomes great enough there. And that's where personal values require specification, because you say, well, it's a wisdom issue of knowing when that occurs. No, what you want to do from a personal values point of view is to make a rule for yourself and say, make it specific so it doesn't have to be a wisdom issue. So you're not always negotiating with yourself, and you remove the emotional and energetic attacks of the ambivalence that comes from indecisiveness that results from failing to have specifications in my personal value system. So in situations where I have certain values that may align and may conflict, I have specific granular rules for that, and I understand what the hierarchy is between those different values, right? So if I value independence and I value conformity, for example, if you are a parent in a family, you may value personal independence, and that may be extremely valuable to you, right? So this is a value. But you also have the value of conforming to the norm of the role of a parent that serves the well-being of your children. So what happens when your value of personal independence and your value the well-being of your children and the requirement to conform to the norm of healthy parenting? What happens when these two things are both requiring energy from you and you don't have enough to do both? Or where you actually have to sacrifice elements of your own personal liberty in order to conform to the norm of healthy parenting for the well-being of your child, right? So you say, well, which one of these is a priority? Do I cut and run and prioritize independence, or do I say, you know what, I'm going to subserve the value of personal independence right now under the value of um, conforming to a norm that enables my child to be raised in accordance with a manner of practices that will help them to be healthy adults, right? So it's about knowing how to prioritize them. So a functional personal value system has specification, it has hierarchy, it also has thresholds. Values must include limits. So no value operates infinitely. So so I have a value. At what cost does this value lose its claim on my life and on my behavior? If the answer is undefined, then the value is unstable. Every value needs to have a limit point. Every value has to have a threshold. And you have to know what that threshold. So specification, hierarchy, thresholds, um, embeddedness. So values must appear in behavior. So I come out and publicly endorse the value of hard work. Nobody cares, right? No, like endorsing a value is not evidence of your value system, right? Like I am an honest person. Are you? Are like whether you say you are or not is irrelevant to the fact of whether you are or not, right? Unless a value has structured prior choices, including difficult ones, then it remains unintegrated. And then finally, revisability. So a value system must be adjustable under the evidence of failure, right? Revisions to your value system should be rare enough um, that you're actually trying to defend your value system, right? You don't want to be constantly overhauling the value system that you have. You want to try to put some energy or invest some energy into maintaining the one that you do have, um, so that you can maintain some posture of a point of view. And revisions should be rare. Revisions should be slow, and they should be structurally justified. If values are altered whenever they become inconvenient, then the system is just a performative system, and it's not really a value system. So a value system that possesses these 5 features has a mechanism for coherence: specification, hierarchy, thresholds, embeddedness, and revisability. It does not remove ambiguity, it manages ambiguity. So now I want to go into basically 5 features that a value system is not. These are kind of anti-features. So several common frameworks are mistaken for value systems, and each one of these frameworks lacks the structure to operate under stress. Number 1 is a list of ideals. We've talked about this already, right? These are high level descriptors of what matters, and they do not guide your behavior unless they are conditioned for conflict, right? So I value excellence and I value integrity. These only become values when they rule something out, right? These only become values when it's like, wow, lying in this situation would make me a lot of money, but I value integrity, so I'm ruling out that option, right? Maybe not. Maybe the personal value of making money tells you to lie, so you lie, right? I'm not telling you what your value system should be. What I'm telling you is that your list of ideals need to constrain your behavior, and they will inform the trade-offs that you're willing to make. Really the high level of a value system is a structure is a design system for the trade-offs that you have to make in life. Is that you could define a value system that way. Um, so what a value system is not. Number one, a list of ideals, not a list of ideals. Number two, a value system is not a moral identity. Very these two concepts of a personal value system and a moral identity are very close. There's paper thin space between them. So describing what kind of person you wish to be does not guarantee that the decisions that you make reflect that identity. A moral identity is aspirational. Personal value system is behavioral, right? A personal value system is your behavior. Without operational hierarchy, identity statements collapse into just branding. This is moral identity is really this is how I want to market myself to people. This is how I want to be perceived as perception management, reputation management. So, not a list of ideals. It's not a moral identity. Number three, a personal value system is not a negation of past systems. So, rejecting a previous set of values does not produce a system. It just produces inversion, right? Well, I used to be a very religious person, and now I'm a very anti-religious person. Like, okay, you've told us it's something that may be narratively interesting, but you haven't actually told us a value system, right? A reversed map is not a new map, right? You ever look at a rug and there's a pattern on the rug, and then you flip the rug over and it's like the obverse, as Alan Watts says, the obverse pattern, right? That it's like, okay, interesting, but no more thought has been put into positively what that value system is here, other than that it's not something else, and that doesn't actually tell us anything. Number four, what a value system is not is it's not a motivational framework. So values that feel motivating under optimal conditions but disappear under constraint cannot guide behavior. They express direction, but they offer no resistance. And then finally, the fifth thing a value system is not is it's not a conditional compass. So what does that mean? It means that values that remain intact only under social approval or under low stakes are not regulating decisions. They are reinforced behaviors without internal grounding. Um, so these are not moral failures; they are design failures. If you've kind of conflated what it means to have a personal value system with any of these things, a list of ideals, a moral identity, a negation of past systems, a motivational framework, or a conditional compass, then that's just a failure in the conception of what you're doing when you're designing a personal value system. A value system is functional when it produces decisions under constraint, not when it signals alignment under clarity. So, what are common failure modes in values design? So, there are several recurring patterns that account for most breakdowns in value system construction. The first pattern will be ambiguity in phrasing. This is kind of related to specification, but values are often stated in terms that cannot resolve real world conflict, like be honest and pursue growth, right? These things don't really offer prioritization logic when alternatives compete. Number two, we've already mentioned lack of ranking, right? Without defined precedence, values cannot resolve contradiction, and conflict between freedom and loyalty or between courage and prudence will result in hesitation rather than decisiveness. And personal value systems are meant to give you the gift of decisiveness. Um, Number three, Social dependency. This is an error in mode when constructing a personal value system. So it's one thing to work with templatized value systems and to customize those so you're not having to reinvent the wheel and do everything from scratch. That's not social dependency. Social dependency is when values rely on the approval or the observation of other people to be maintained because those are not internalized. So they can't regulate behavior when reinforcement is removed. Another error that you make when constructing a personal value system or that you could make is idealism without operability. So these like North Star principles that provide vision but lack the intermediate steps to like they don't support decision making. So they kind of drift into that more aspirational category, and we're wanting to steer our value system construction into the realm of execution rather than aspiration. And then five, there's no feedback mechanism into your value system. This is one of the most dangerous errors to make. Is that when your values fail to guide your action, then your system must adapt. If failure results in either abandonment or doubling down, then that framework is brittle. So these errors persist, and they don't just persist because of like people lack conviction. You're not convicted in your values enough. Maybe the problem is with the values themselves and the way they're articulated and the way you've consciously connected to them. Errors often persist because they are not building systems that translate conviction into action under tension, not because there's a lack of conviction, right? So to kind of like sum all this up, a value system must resolve conflict without requiring constant deliberation. The role of a value system is not to affirm self image. The role of a value system is to restrict the available options that you have under ambiguity, to stabilize decision logic, and to preserve continuity across time. A value that cannot impose a boundary is not regulating action. A system that cannot resolve internal contradiction is not functioning. When values are defined and ranked and stress tested, they produce not just ethical consistency, but behavioral reliability for yourself, which is worth so much more. A value system does not reduce your freedom, it defines the shape that your freedom takes. And if a principle does not change your behavior when pressure is applied, then it's not actually part of the system. It's just surplus language that you use to market your identity or to manage your reputation.